We're talking about death and dying. I know you guys don't like to talk about this kind of stuff, but of course it's part of life. Um, Working in medicine, I worked in medicine for 30 years. I worked in the lab. The lab is actually it's part of the morgue. Pathologists are in charge of the lab, and they're the ones that do the autopsies and whatnot. So um, yeah, we got to see them all. And not only that, but if you're a lab tech, one of the places you go is the emergency room, and people don't always survive in the emergency room. There's another place where you go, it's ICU and CCU, intensive care unit, and people don't always survive in there as well. So, and I worked at a hospital that was a repository for transplants. So we kept them alive until we could transplant until the transplants were ready to go. Which sounds kind of grisly. It sounds kind of macabre, but that's the two transplant hospitals were down the street. So we would and we were a trauma hospital. So you got what you got. Anyway, so we're going to talk about death and dying. Another thing that's going to happen today in this lecture, I'm going to be attacking this administration because there are some things that is happening with this administration, not just with education. They did something stupid yesterday, but we won't even go into that. We're talking about research and keeping people alive for an extended length of time. We're going to talk about vaccinations. As weird as that sounds, we're talking about death and dying, and here we're going to talk about vaccinations. So let's go ahead and get started. The Dusk of Life, Chapter 18, the end. This is when people wink out and travel to the other side or whatever they're doing. Okay, it really all depends on what your religion is, how you look at these things, and that's what we're going to talk about. The difference between one religion and the other. Everybody has their way of dealing with death. Some of them are very realistic. Some of them give everybody something to do, so that the grieving process is not as extreme. Other religions do a really bad job of dealing with death. And I'm laughing about that because that's was one of my jobs. And I worked in a cemetery in California, National Cemetery, Riverside National Cemetery, one of the largest national cemeteries in the United States. And so I got to watch and bury people over about a 9-month period. Anyway, okay, so let's go ahead and get started. As recently as the turn of the 20th century, 50 out of every 1,000 people in the United States died every year. In Europe, during plagues and natural disasters, as many as 40% of the population might die. 1/3 of all babies died in infancy. 50% of children died before their 10th birthday. And here's an example right here. He was 4 years old. Budded on earth to bloom in heaven. Death was normal. Death was expected, and it happened very frequently. Just because you had a child didn't mean that that child was going to live to grow up. And of course, there is never any possibility. There's always a possibility that somebody will die, but it's not nearly what it used to be. I mean, you can imagine if half of the people that you went to first grade with were dead before they made it to the what is the tenth birthday? That would be the fourth grade. Before they made it to the fourth grade, 1/3 of babies died in infancy. My goodness, we don't have anything close to that now. And it's mainly because we have defeated childhood illnesses. And the way we have done that is through vaccinations. During the 20th century, advances in medicine, from surgical techniques to antibiotics, reduced death rates and increased life expectancies, not just in the United States, but all over the world. Death rates have now fallen to 9% in infant mortality and below 1% in the United States. Less than 1% of infants die before and most of that doesn't have anything to do with childhood illnesses. Most of that has to do with genetic problems that they're born with. Remember what the figure was before. Turn of the 20th century, 1/3 of all babies died in infancy. Now it's less than 1%. Children rarely succumb to childhood illnesses anymore. Adults most often live to retire, and older individuals now are given the medicines to fight off formerly fatal illnesses. The number one cause of death, even when I was born, back in 1949, the number one cause of death was pneumonia. People died of pneumonia. People never die of pneumonia anymore. Well, they do. They do die of pneumonia. And actually, COVID and AIDS has increased the number of people dying from pneumonia. But it was the number one killer back then. Not anymore. It's heart disease now. The first generation to reach adulthood with only 5% of the population ever experiencing death in their presence was the baby boom generation. That's my generation. Children born between 1946 and 1964. And of course, I was born in 1949. And here are some examples of baby boomers. Only 1 in 3 people died at home. People rarely thought of their own deaths. Today, however, death tends to be more to be getting closer to people as violence, drug abuse, COVID-19, and AIDS has become more prevalent. There are at least 3 aspects of death. Biological death. Biological death, as definition of death, is when the bodily functions cease, your heart stops beating, you stop breathing, and your brain activity ceases. That's biological death. Social death is basic social attitudes toward death. And of course, it changes over time. Most people pretend it doesn't exist. Psychological aspect of death, both of the dying and the bereaved. What is, well, strange, isn't it? Before modern medicine allowed physicians to maintain a dying patient indefinitely, biological death took place when the heart stopped beating and respiration ceased. The brain was starved for oxygen and all living functions stopped. Now we have the capability of breathing for an individual and maintaining a heartbeat indefinitely. Life support can be maintained indefinitely despite the fact that the brain has no awareness. And of course, that's one of the things that we did in order to harvest someone's organs. If they were an organ donor, we could keep them going it's not really indefinite anymore because there are organ systems that are failing, but we could keep them going for long enough to harvest their organs. I know that sounds horrible, doesn't it? But we would have somebody would die in a motorcycle accident, and we would harvest their lungs, we'd harvest their heart, their kidneys, their liver. I mean, you could do all that. Corneas from their eyes, anything anybody needed. If they were an organ donor, it's right there on your driver's license. Because of our ability to maintain people indefinitely, the AMA developed new definitions for death: irreversible cessation of circulatory and respiratory function, irreversible cessation of all functions of the entire brain, including the brain stem. However, people can live for an extended period of time with only their brain stem functioning, a state referred to as a persistent vegetative state. As long as the brain stem is alive, then you can keep the body alive. And that's normally what we were doing when we were maintaining people so that we could harvest their organs. We're keeping them in a vegetative state. They were dead. They had no, they couldn't breathe on their own. Their circulation, their heart wasn't beating on its own. They weren't breathing on their own. There was no brain activity, but we were keeping them alive. We were keeping their organs viable, is what we were doing. Social aspects of death and dying. Many social aspects of death and dying are governed by religious or legal prescriptions that tend to reflect a society's attitude toward death. Embalming is a social custom that has become a law in most states. The Jewish practice of standing watch, or shomer, over the deceased until they are buried is also a social custom. But the one thing that you need to remember about someone who's Jewish who dies, they try to bury them by the next day, before the next sundown is what happens. Sometimes it can't happen. Sometimes for various reasons they can't get them. That can't happen. But still, someone will stay with them, and it's known as shomer. Psychological aspects of death. Psychologists feel that people use rituals surrounding death to give themselves something to do when someone dies instead of feeling hopeless. Some rituals allow for extended contacts with the dying or dead and reaffirm the strength and efficacy of the community. In the Jewish community, friends and relatives gather at the deathbed and lend support to the dying, and this is known as vidui or shema, and that's what they're doing right now. They're covering their eyes is what they're doing, and praying. So that's how you pray when you're doing Shema. In the Jewish community, when a friend or relative dies and someone hears of their death, they ritually tear an article of clothing that they will wear for the rest of the day, and this is known as keriah. After the funeral, a group of male relatives, at least 7, will gather and share and vent feelings of the deceased. This is known as sitting Shiva. All these rituals help the bereaved confront the reality of death. Whoops, take the same one. The study of death is called thanatology. Many people believe that people must not only learn to deal with the death of someone close to themselves, but also their own death as well. And this is death education, is what thanatology is all about. Hospice care is care given to someone in a controlled setting, but outside the hospital. Some hospice care is provided in spatial housing where medical care is available. Other hospice care is at home by medical professionals. When my mother-in-law died, she was in hospice care at our house in Mississippi. This is when we were stationed in Mississippi. Throughout most of the 20th century, medicine allowed people to get farther and farther from death. People died in a hospital away from all but the closest relatives. But the AIDS epidemic in the early 80s changed all that as more and more people contracted the nearly always fatal disease and expired slowly. The process of slowly declining to death is referred to as death trajectory. And this is an individual dying from AIDS. I was working in medicine in the 1980s, and I saw all of this. I watched all this as it was evolving. I got out of the service in 1983, and started working in the hospitals in Omaha, and we were part of the whole AIDS thing. And it was scary because we didn't know what AIDS was. They didn't find out what AIDS was until about 1984. So before that, all these people are dying, and everybody was very, very confused as to what was going on. A lot of people quit medicine because they didn't want to become involved in this. They thought it was some kind of plague, but eventually we figured out that it was a virus that could be controlled, and we found out where it came from. So there you go. It was interesting. But before that happened, one of the things that happened to me, I had a ruptured spleen, and they gave me 6 units of blood. And at that time, they didn't know how to check for the AIDS virus. And because of that, I had 6 units of blood, and we didn't know whether it was contaminated with AIDS. Luckily, it wasn't. Obviously, it wasn't. I didn't contract AIDS, but potentially it could have been contaminated with AIDS. I guess I was lucky. Lingering pattern of dying. The individual is expected to die but clings to life longer than expected. Short reprieve pattern. The person's death is postponed unexpectedly. Cancer goes into remission, but the reprieve tends to be short-lived. Abrupt surprise pattern. The individual is expected to recover but unexpectedly dies. And this is what happened with Pope Francis. He had just gotten out of the hospital. He'd been in the hospital for 38 days with pneumonia, and by golly, if he didn't have a stroke and die of a heart attack. Suspended sentence pattern. A person was in the hospital to die but is suddenly discharged from medical care because the crisis has passed. That's what they thought was going on with Pope Francis. And they were right. He didn't die of pneumonia. Re-entry pattern. The person steadily declines but is able to remain home between periods of hospitalization. The terminally ill will often pass through 3 phases: the acute phase, the chronic phase, and the terminal phase. The acute phase is a crisis that causes high stress and increasing awareness of the inevitability of death. Chronic phase is an adjustment period when the individual resolves their feelings toward their own demise. And the terminal phase is when the individual withdraws from others and disengages from the world. When the individual enters the terminal phase of the death process, often they will notice marked accelerated cognitive degeneration. This is called terminal drop or terminal decline, when the focus tends to be inward and the individual stops eating or drinking, or at least has to be reminded to eat and drink. And of course, when I was working in medicine, we referred to that as terminal drop. Now, my mother was a nurse, and she used to come home from the emergency room. She worked graveyard shift, and they called it the graveyard shift for a couple different reasons. One of them is not very attractive. And then she would tell us stories. Well, there were 6 kids in my family, and most of the kids didn't want to hear her stories, but I was fascinated by her talk about these things. And she talked about terminal drop. Sometimes she'd work in ICU or CCU, and at that time, you usually didn't die at home. You usually died with some kind of hospital care. They didn't have all the things that they have today, so people would die in the hospital. And she, of course, was a nurse taking care of these guys, and she would know when they were going to go and when they weren't going to go, when they were going to stick around for a while. She's pretty good at it, and she used to talk about it all the time. 10 causes of death in the United States in 1900. One of the things you need to remember that in 1900, the life expectancy was 47 years. In 1900. So you're only supposed to live to be 47 years old. Then one of the reasons was because pneumonia was the #1 killer. 12% of all deaths were due to pneumonia. Tuberculosis, which they called it consumption, 11% died of that. #3 was diarrhea. When was the last time you heard about somebody dying? Actually, when was the last time you heard about somebody dying of tuberculosis? Tuberculosis used to be a huge killer until we developed a treatment for it. It's called INH therapy. It's three different antibiotics. And what we do now is if somebody has tuberculosis, we isolate them and force them to take the antibiotics. They have to take the antibiotics because if they go out in the community, then more people are going to get tuberculosis. It's a highly contagious disease. So we isolate them and give them this INH therapy. And we keep them on it for like 6 months. I'm not exactly sure. It used to be for a year. But if we find somebody with tuberculosis, we isolate them. And now people don't die of tuberculosis. You never hear of people dying of tuberculosis. It's a bacteria and it has to be spread from one person to the next. So somebody has to have it. And we have almost eradicated it because it's a bacteria. It's like um, it's like the woolly mammoth. You can only have another woolly mammoth if, if two woolly mammoths are breeding. That's the only way you can have them. And tuberculosis is the same way. It's a bacteria, and it has to be maintained in the human form. So now we have almost eradicated it. And by golly, it's going to come back because because we aren't doing these things anymore. We're not isolating people. We're not forcing people to get the measles vaccination. Diarrhea. When was the last time you heard of somebody dying of diarrhea? Well, that didn't happen, but 8% of the people in 1900 died of diarrhea. There's heart disease. That's very common. Chronic nephritis. Nephritis is kidney disease, and people were dying. 5% of the population were dying of kidney disease. Unintentional injury, 4 other strokes for you. There's 4. Disease of early infancy, we have almost eradicated these with vaccinations. And there's cancer way down the list. And there's diphtheria. Of course, we are vaccinating against diphtheria also. But back then, 2% of the population was dying of diphtheria. Leading cause of death in the United States of people over 40 now, our life expectancy is 77. Cancer, 31%. Heart disease, 22% almost. Unintentional injuries, 7.6%. Diabetes, 3.6%. Cardiovascular disease, stroke, 3.6%. If we go back, stroke is 4% back in 1900. Where's heart disease? There's heart disease, 8%. And now it's 31%. Oh, 22%. There you go. Things change because medicine has changed and it's gotten a lot better. And we are able to keep people going for a longer period of time. But we're moving backwards, sadly, because this administration has decimated CDC. If you use science, science will keep you alive longer. If you pretend that science doesn't exist, we're going backwards. I'm sorry, it's the way it works. Childhood illnesses, they've lost 3 people, 3 children to measles. We hadn't had a measles death in 10 years, and now we've had a measles outbreak in Texas, eastern New Mexico, and southern Oklahoma and southeastern Kansas, and 3 people have died. 3 children have died. 3 school-aged children have died. We hadn't had a death in 10 years. And that's because paranoia. People don't want to get vaccinated. They don't want to vaccinate their kids because someone told them they might get autism. They may become autistic. Well, one thing doesn't really have anything to do with the other. And sadly, paranoia is causing all these problems. People face our own death differently. In young adulthood, people tend to be invulnerable. They maintain a personal fable, or at least they feel invulnerable. They feel bulletproof, just like Superman. Thus, when other adolescents die, the usual reaction is it can't possibly and it won't happen to me. While this attitude tends to become more realistic the more responsibility the individual acquires, job and family, there is still an air of invulnerability in their actions. By the time someone reaches middle adulthood, they are usually resolved that they will someday die. And I do know that I will someday die. I'm 75 years old. Life expectancy for males is 75 years old. So I could either be reaching my expiration date, or maybe I'll live as long as the Pope. He was only 88. But my mother lived to be 99. My dad lived to be 90, and he had a heart condition. He had a heart murmur almost all of his life. So, hey, listen, we'll see. I know I'll die someday, but right now I feel too good. These individuals begin looking at how much time they have left instead of toward the future. People begin planning for retirement and accumulating money to see them through in their old age. And that's actually where I am right now. I'm being forced to retire by your institution. It doesn't want, it wants me to come back and live at 7,000 feet, which I probably couldn't possibly do. Middle-aged individuals begin working towards savings as much time in life as possible. The phrase life is just too short enters your vocabulary. As people get older and move into late adulthood, they become less anxious about death. They're more likely to use emotion-focused coping strategies. With the mounting losses of friends and relatives, the individual gradually recognizes their own mortality. Many are old and infirm, but they seem to be coping with their situation. 2 out of 3 people surveyed as to whether they would trade good health to die earlier take the time alive over the good health. And actually, I have good health, and I think that is what probably is keeping me going. I've lost about half the people that I graduated from high school with have died. About a third of the people that I graduated from college with, that's just 4 years later, they have died. So, you know, come see, come saw. Approaching death, psychological changes often take place even before they are overt physiological signs of dying. Terminal drop often appears at this time. It is the acceptance of mortality, the seeming impairment of intellectual abilities, and the distancing oneself from friends and family. Terminal drop is often attributed to chronic ailments, but it is seen in people of all ages who are near death, not just the old. And I used to work in a children's hospital back in the day when we didn't have any treatment for leukemia. And it was a regional children's hospital. It was in Omaha, Nebraska. And we used to get all the kids that they had tried to treat for leukemia, and they weren't, it didn't take. So it was a pretty grim place if you think about it, because we have all these 3 and 4-year-olds with leukemia, and there's nothing we can do to keep them alive. And that was pretty tough. And even those children, even the 3 and 4-year-olds would go into terminal drop. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross from Cornell University did studies. Actually, she has died. She's not at Cornell anymore. Did studies on thanatology and discovered that most people go through 5 stages before they die. The first is denial. The second is anger. Then they go into bargaining, depression, and ultimate acceptance. You know, I've watched thousands of people die, and I can tell you that almost everybody accepts the fact that they are dying. And it's not like a huge struggle. They're gasping for air. It's not the way it works. That's the way it works in combat movies, possibly, but most people accept their the fact that they're dying. They understand. Thanatologists have discovered that people actually attempt to hold on to life until they reach a certain milestone date. And this will drive you crazy. People hold on until their birthday so that they'll be 1 year older on the gravestone. They'll hold on until their anniversary. A big day is Christmas. Everybody wants to, or New Year's. People want to make to hit New Year's. It's really kind of fascinating because you get the morgues empty, and then all of a sudden, you got to work New Year's Day, and all of a sudden it's full. It's a little interesting. Very often, the milestone date is a birthday or anniversary. Religious people tend to hold on until after select religious holidays. Easter is big. Halloween's not so not very big, but it's really kind of interesting, and it's funny if you are the one that are checking them into the morgue. Thanatologists don't want to make the studying of death too easy. They have taken words that seem to mean the same thing and given them different definitions. Bereavement is the loss of someone to whom one feels close and the process of adjusting to it. Bereavement can affect all aspects of someone's life, including their social or community status or their roles. Grief is the emotional response experienced in the early stages of bereavement. Grief can range from anger to emptiness. Both grief and bereavement tend to be defined through cultural contexts. Mourning is the behavior that an individual participates in after the death of a loved one. This is very much culturally dictated. The Irish have an all-night wakes where friends and family toast the memory of the deceased. Flying a flag at half-staff is an example of mourning, and all the flags are at half-staff right now because of Pope Francis's death. And I think the Catholic Church mourns for 9 days, so I'm guessing that they'll be at half-staff for about a week. In Japan, the bereaved are encouraged to maintain contact with the deceased. They cremate their dead and place the urns in family burial plots. This happens also in Korea and in China. They create shrines to their ancestors in their homes and feed them as if they were there. Some southwestern Native Americans do not speak of the dead for fear of being contaminated by their dead spirit. Patterns of grief. Anticipatory grief is the feeling of anticipatory loss that people feel before someone dies. Anticipatory grief is actually adaptive in that it tends to help the individual prepare themselves psychologically and practically for the loss of their friend or relative. Grief work. Thanatologists studying the process of grief discovered a 3-stage pattern. Shock and disbelief is the first stage. This may last several weeks, especially if the death was unexpected. The individual feels lost and confused. They seem to be unable to believe in the death. This may actually protect them from more intense reactions. Normal physical reactions may include shortness of breath, tightness in the chest or throat, nausea, feeling of emptiness in the abdomen. This is all part of the anxiety that is being caused. The numbness will eventually give way to overwhelming feelings of sadness, and at that point, they start crying. Stage 2, preoccupation with the memory of the dead person. The second phase may last 6 months or more. The survivor is trying to come to terms with their loss, but cannot yet accept it. Physical reactions include insomnia, frequent crying, fatigue, loss of appetite. They may relive their lives together and their entire relationship. At times, the survivor may feel that the deceased is present, even to the point of seeing their face. These episodes diminish with time, as do vivid dreams of their relationship together. Resolution. The final phase arises when the bereaved renews interest in everyday activity. Memories of the deceased now bring fond feelings mingled with sadness, but is no longer a sharp pain and longing. They will become socially active again. This is especially important in widowers, in that they tend to have a less entwined social network, and that's the males who lose their spouse. Grief therapy is counseling that can help the bereaved cope with their loss. There are many misperceptions about death, dying, and grieving. Researchers have discovered that depression is far from universal. Only 15 to 35% of grieving survivors show signs of depression. Failure to show distress at outset does not necessarily lead to problems. In fact, the people who showed the most distress were more likely to still be troubled after 2 years. Not everyone needs to work through a loss or benefits from doing so. Some people who worked through their grief had the most severe problems. Now you wonder, this is huge. That's 20% difference, 15 to 35%. And the reason is because some religions, like I told you before, some religions do death really well, and other religions not so much. The Jewish faith does a great job with people that die in their faith. Catholics are really good at it. Lutherans aren't too bad, but you get into the Protestant religions, and actually, they don't really handle it very well. Methodists, Baptists, sometimes they have a problem with people who die. I'm not sure, I haven't been around that many Mormons. I'm not really sure how well they handle uh, death. Well, I've worked in Catholic hospitals, so everybody's got a job, and that's kind of cool. You know, you're the aunt, so you do this. You know, you prepare the food. Uh, you're the you're the brother, so you're the one that finds the chairs. It's really kind of interesting. Surviving spouses, not only do women tend to live longer than men, but in the majority of marriages in the United States, the woman marries an older man. Widows tend to be worse off economically than widowers. In my case, that's not true. My wife makes a lot more money than I do. But she is younger than I am. She's 2 years younger than I am. But our plans are, since I'm so much healthier than she is, that she's supposed to die first, and then we're trying to accumulate all this stuff. And one of the things that happened over the last couple of weeks is that she lost $13,000 out of one of her IRAs from one of her jobs. Yeah, one of her jobs. She was doing really well. It was really piling up there. And then all of a sudden, the stock market crashed because of Trump's tariffs, and the IRA lost $13,000. And the reality is, a lot of people's IRAs lost lots of money. Um, Wealthy people didn't lose very much money. Some of them made money, but us poor schlobs, we all lost money in our savings account, our 401ks and whatnot. In the United States, 14% of men over 65 are widowed. In the United States, 40% of women over 65 are widowed. Among women who are over 85, 80% are widowed. Among men over 85, only 43% are widowed and not married. The average white woman is widowed at 56, African American women at 49, the Hispanic woman at 48. Losing a parent, half of all children become orphaned by the time they are in their mid 50s. My mother died in 2014, and I was, how old was I? 51, 65. I was 65 when my mother died. 75% by the time they reach their 60s. Grieving for parents lasts longer than for other deaths. My parents prepared us, uh, and they wouldn't let us grieve. They didn't believe in that. They didn't believe in grieving. It's like the passing of a torch as far as my mother was concerned. 25, and like I said, she talked about death and dying all the time. 25% of bereaved adults still have had emotional problems 1 to 5 years after the death of their parents, and I didn't have any problem even within a month of my mother's my mother and father's death. This included sadness, depression, thoughts of suicide, none of that. Of course, that'd be silly. 50% continued to have physical reactions in the form of illness, fatigue, and general decline in health. And of course, my situation is probably a little bit different because both my parents were so old. So you anticipate that your parents aren't going to be there anymore. And it's a lot easier when they're in their 90s than when they're in their 50s or 60s. Euthanasia is the act of allowing or assisting someone to die. Euthanasia has been practiced in the United States for decades. Doctors who have wanted to stop the pain and suffering of a terminal patient would merely stop making overt attempts to keep them alive. Withholding or discontinuing life-sustaining treatment is known as passive euthanasia. Dr. Jack Kevorkian, however, actively assisted people in seeking their death. This is known as assisted suicide. Assisted suicide is legal in Oregon. It's also legal in Canada, but it's been very controversial in Canada because it was just legalized, and so they're not exactly sure how things are going to turn out. Even before Erickson, people tended to review their lives before they died. This is referred to by thanatologists as a life review. If life reviews seem to be beneficial for all people, but especially those who look back and saw a true purpose in their lives, these tended to be the people who feared death the least. And of course, I've been a teacher and I've worked in medicine most of my life, so when I look back at things, I think I'm going to be okay. Ritual is important for Hinduism, which includes bathing the body with holy water and draped with white cloth, sprinkling rice on the mouth, cremation with only men present, and that's what's going on here. Ashes are scattered on the 31st day. A memorial service is held. And it's usually scattered in a river. The Ganges is big. I like to, in the holy rivers. There are holy rivers in India. The Ganges is the only one I know. Buddhism rituals include presence of monks is important. And this is a military member who has died. And this is in Arlington, actually. Bathing ceremony after death, cremation, feast held on the day of cremation, continual prayers performed by monks, and there you go. Judaism tends to have a community of volunteers. Body is washed and purified. Body is dried and wrapped in linen. Family members enter 7-day mourning period followed by a second 30-day period. The coffin can have no nails and no handles. And like I told you, I worked in a cemetery in California, and no handles. Now, normally, we lowered the coffin down into the grave with straps, but getting it out of the hearse was a bit of a trick because, well, you can see how awkward it is without handles. Normally, it is pulled out using the handles, but a Jewish coffin has no handles, so pulling it out is a bit of a trick. Nothing metal can have nothing metal. The coffin is sealed with pegs, wooden pegs. Two major mourning traditions in Christianity: the Catholics anointing the sick, followed by a vigil and a requiem mass is held. The Protestant religion may have a funeral service, which includes a eulogy. So there's a requiem mass for Catholics and a eulogy for Protestants. Protestant tradition is less ritualized than Catholic tradition, and of course there are hundreds of Protestant denominations. Seventh-day Adventists, Moravians, Baptists, Lutherans, Episcopalians. There's just lots of them. There's lots of them. They all have their own rituals, but primarily, well, they all have eulogies for the dead as a requiem, and the Catholics all have requiem masses for the dead. Islamic rituals include gathering near the deathbed, reciting the Quran. The body is bathed and burial takes place shortly after death. It's supposed to be, just like in the Jewish faith, it's supposed to be before sundown the next day. Cremation is forbidden. The body is laid on the right side facing Mecca. A 3-day mourning period with wives mourning for 4 months and 10 days. Hindu, a year anniversary of the death of the deceased, the favorite food is prepared. The Buddhists, they have ancestor worship. Jewish, Yarzeit candle is lit for 24 hours, and a prayer is recited 3 times. In Christian faith, there's a 3-day period called All Hallows Eve around Halloween, and actually Halloween is All Hallows Eve, the 31st. The first is All Saints Day, and the third holy day is the 2nd of November, and I can't remember what they call that one. Muslims visit graves, they show respect and offer prayers. The Day of the Dead, this is huge down in Mexico. They have a 3-day festival, and it's not an unhappy time. It's when the dead potentially come back. Anyway, there you go. That's it. Okay, I'll talk to you again someday, maybe. Sorry if this spooked you. I apologize. I've been dealing with this. I'm 75 and I've been dealing with death all my life, and I just don't see it as anything negative. I mean, everybody dies. Everything dies. It's the way it works. So, got to prepare your mind for watching it happen. And most people don't have to worry about it. But wait a minute, here, I'll show my face. There we go. Most people don't have to worry about it. But when you work in the field, you have to deal with it. And you got to get through it. Working at the children's hospital was tough. That was really tough because I had kids at that same age. And here I was dealing with adolescents, teenagers, and whatnot, with chronic acute illnesses and acute illnesses. It was pretty tough, but got to get through it. There you go. So I'll talk to you, well, maybe. I am teaching this summer. I'm teaching, what am I teaching? I'm teaching research methods and advanced readings, which is the capstone class, and abnormal psychology. So we'll see what happens. Will I come back next semester? Well, in the fall. What happened was they decided that everybody had to come back to campus, and I told them I couldn't, and I wouldn't. And but I've been asked to adjunct, so there's a possibility I may be teaching some classes. They may have a hard time finding people to replace. I teach all the classes, so they may have a hard time finding people. So I don't know. We'll see what happens in the fall. But officially, I'm retiring after the summer. So I love you guys.